show us. Watch.
Hello everybody, welcome back to Screenstars. I'm here today to bring you my review for the 2001 classic Steven Seagal film, Exit Wounds. The film is directed by, and this is not easy to pronounce, but I'll give it a go, Andrzej Kartovayak. I'm sure I pronounced that and butchered it terribly, so I do apologise. And stars, of course, Steven Seagal. We have DMX, Isaiah Washington, Anthony Anderson, Michael J. White, Bill Duke, Jill Hennessy, and Tom Arnold. Now, Steven Seagal plays a character called Oren Boyd, who is an honest cop, and at the beginning of the film, he sees, I think it's the vice president, there's an attempt made on his life, and Steven Seagal jumps to the rescue. However, in his enthusiasm to save the vice president's life, he throws him off a bridge into some water below, which humiliates the vice president. He's not happy about it, even though it saved his life, and proceeds to make Steven Seagal's life a living hell by getting him transferred from his current department, demoted, etc. And he's sent to basically the worst department in the city that everyone hates. He gets there, doesn't make a good first impression, but soon discovers that there is police corruption going on in this precinct, and it's up to him and DMX as character to team up and search out those who are being corrupt. Right, what are my thoughts on Exit Wounds? Well, this is kind of an interesting film in Steven Seagal's film catalogue. It was his first film, I believe, after a couple of years off, 2 or 3 years off. He'd not been on screen for 2 or 3 years. So it did quite well when it opened, sort of thing. It was a reasonable hit at the box office, I think it's fair to say. But also at the same time, I think it was pretty much his last theatrical release, unless you count Machete, where he played the villain in that one. I don't think, and correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, I don't think he's had another theatrical release since this one, which is odd, really, because this did do reasonably well, even though it wasn't particularly liked by critics, certainly. So it's an interesting one, really. He got rid of his ponytail for this one. You could argue he slimmed down a little bit for this one because he was starting to put on weight. And at times his performance is. You feel silly saying this about Steven Seagal in his films. At times his performance is, quite charming and almost borders on charismatic. And the fight scenes are very, very competent. And he also in this film experimented with wire work for the first time. Well, I say him. I suspect most of the wire work wasn't done by him, because this was certainly the first film where I really started to notice body doubles like standing in for Seagal. It's very, very obvious that there's body doubles taking place in this film for a lot of the scenes. But you can understand it. Some of the scenes where it's clearly a body double, like the really athletic scenes where it's kind of flipping over the top of people, and some of the wire work stuff. He may be very skilled at Aikido and stuff, but he ain't no athlete in that sense. So it grinds a little bit, because if you've ever seen Steven Seagal being interviewed, and he fairly recently, just a couple of years ago, he was interviewed on the Scott Atkins channel, The Art of Action, and Scott Atkins asked him directly, have you ever used wire work and body doubles? And he just point blank said no. He just blatantly lied. You're like, why lie? Just say yes, of course I did. So he doesn't endear himself to the audience, really, when he says things like that. So while this is, nicely polished action film with decent action set pieces, it doesn't necessarily feel like a traditional Seagal film, because most Seagal films up to that point, you kind of see him almost like invincible. No one can lay a finger on him for the most part. And for this film, for the first time, he's kind of people are getting shots in on him and stuff like that. And it's almost like they're trying to make him a little bit more vulnerable in this film. Only slightly. I don't imagine his ego would allow much more than that. And another problem that we have with this film really is DMX. I don't necessarily have a problem with DMX in this film, but his performance is a little bit stilted, a little bit wooden, lacking character. And when you combine that with Steven Seagal, who is the very definition of those things I just mentioned, it really lacks a lot of personality for the most part, this film. You know what I mean? Some charisma. So they put Tom Arnold in the film to try and give it that, I suspect. But then his part in the film doesn't make any sense. It feels really out of place. There's a couple of comedic characters they put in the film. Anthony Anderson, who plays like the stereotypical comedy sidekick for DMX, and then you've got Tom Arnold, who's like the comic relief for Steven Seagal, and they just feel out of place in the film. Tom Arnold's character, you didn't need to be in the film. He meets him by going to like an anger management course, which is quite amusing, that the anger management sequence. But we didn't need to see Tom Arnold again at all in this film. It just seemed a little bit odd, and it seemed out of place to have him in this film. You've got Michael J. White in this film, who, as we all know, has developed into a top-notch action star on his own merits now. So you get him to see him tangled with Steven Seagal in this film. So, like I said, there's a lot of things here to enjoy for a Steven Seagal fan, especially when you compare to some of the stuff we've had over the last 15 years or so from Seagal. This is a masterpiece compared to some of them. But as a comparison piece to some of his earlier films, this feels like almost it's trying too hard. It's trying to be too flashy, too glossy, lacks personality. I think Steven Seagal works better with people like Marlon Wayans and people like that, who's got a bit of charisma and a bit of personality, can kind of be the yin to Steven Seagal's yang sort of thing. And the two similar in their personalities, DMX and Steven Seagal, in this film, so they don't bounce off each other particularly well. And it's not a massively engaging story either, the story of police corruption, stuff like that. It's not as if it's like a whodunit. And who's the great mastermind behind all this police corruption? I think they could have done a much better job of kind of building that up. It's just kind of, for me, revealed far too early in the film. And it's not exactly subtle either. So, would I say this is one of my favourites? I think that's hard to say. I think, I would probably, and I've done a Steven Seagal top 10, I think Exit Wounds was in my top 10, but that's only because you're kind of limited with Steven Seagal films, because he's done quite a few stinkers over the years. To find really 10 top quality films is a bit of a struggle sometimes with Seagal films. So this definitely deserves to be watched if you're a fan of action films, a fan of Steven Seagal, obviously. But it is definitely not his finest work. But after the performance of this at the box office, I do think he deserved maybe another shot at another box office film. But as we know, I think his ego was going into overdrive. And there is that legendary story as well from Tom Arnold. And you can find it on YouTube. Just type in Tom Arnold, Steven Seagal story, and you'll see it, where he talks about Seagal walking through a door and falling into like some water. Didn't realise there was no like floor behind this door, and he fell into the water. And when he came out of the water, like his dye was streaming down his face from his hair and stuff. Tom Arnold tells it much better than me, but it might be something you want to check out. If you like checking out Steven Seagal stories on YouTube, that'll be one for you to check out. So yeah, thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed my review for Exit Wounds. Any more Seagal requests, pop them in the comments. I'm gonna carry on with Seagal reviews. I'm gonna do more Stallone, more Chuck Norris, more Van Damme, and just keep going with all these classic action stars and covering as many of those movies as I can. So thanks for checking out this one.